Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. I'm delighted to be joined today by Kelly Nicoll, who is this year's IOSH President. The third time in a row we've had an IOSH President interview, which is great. Kelly and I have a chat about her big three priorities for the year and what she's really going to be focusing on and campaigning for. We'll also speak a little bit about the leisure industry, which is where Kelly works on a day-to-day basis, and it's a really fascinating industry with some quite unique challenges that we will talk about, and hopefully you'll get an insight into what Kelly's up to, how she sees the world of safety, some really great stuff about coaching and self care, looking after yourself as a safety professional, and lots of other fantastic insights and content from this episode as well. So I hope you will enjoy it. Just before I hand over to myself and Kelly, sounds a bit weird to say handing over to myself, but anyway, if you've got 5 minutes, I'd really appreciate it if you could help me with the State of Safety Survey 2025. The link will be in the show notes. Answer a few questions about what's going on in safety. You'll get entry to a prize draw where you can win one of £1,000 or thousands of pounds worth of prizes. You'll get a free copy of my Slipology best-selling book, and you'll get early access to the results. So if you've got 5 minutes, I'd really appreciate your help with that. Enjoy the episode. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
It's the third of my now annual, hopefully, IOSH President podcast. So you've got a lot to live up to.
No pressure then.
No, it'll be good. It'll be good. So, in terms of your kind of dedication to and interest in and passion about safety, I think you've spoken before. Some incidents have happened, in your life, and talk us a bit about that in terms of what got you really inspired to work in this field.
So I think, well, I fell into it. Literally, I was a jobbing actor and took a job as an administrator, and part of the team that I was looking after had health and safety in, and I found it quite interesting. And as the acting work dried up, the health and safety work continued to increase, which was great. And I think initially I kind of saw it as a great job. Really, really enjoyed it. Lots of interaction with other human beings, loved delivering training. And then, I joined a business kind of a few months after a fatality. And that the whole business was still really, really feeling it. And I remember sitting in, because this young man died overseas, and I remember sitting in the hotel, having been to see the venue to decide whether we were going to send a team back or not.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in the hotel talking to my eldest stepson and asking him about how his day was, and he was working as a plumber's apprentice. And I remember being really struck by this feeling that the idea of him going to work and not coming home actually made me feel physically sick.
Yeah.
And I think I'd kind of got it. I'd had it before in this kind of in the kind of theory of it. Of course, nobody should go to work and not come home. But actually, that kind of moment for me was really that element of going, right, how do we change the conversation around safety? How do we? I used to apologize for what I do. You used to go to parties and go, oh, I'm a health and safety person, and then immediately apologize because everybody thinks we're the fun police. And actually, I suddenly stopped doing that and kind of going, actually, no, my job is to make sure that everybody I work with goes home. And actually, that's a phenomenal job, and something that, we can be incredibly proud of. And I
mm,
think that's kind of where it kind of really stems from. And
yeah,
then a few years after that, um, we had an incident where a ladder collapsed underneath somebody.
mm,
And I was in Newcastle, and it happened in kind of right down on the south coast. And my other half kind of drove me all the way down as I'm trying to gather information and kind of prep for everything. And then I remember going in and seeing him in the hospital, and
mm,
he was still screaming in absolute agony. We didn't really
right,
know what had happened and how bad it was. Um, and literally the first thing he said to me was, "Cal, I promised you I'd check that ladder."
mm.
And I was like, it literally doesn't matter
Yeah, it doesn't
anyway.
matter
Do you
right
know,
now.
like,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and I think, yeah, that was kind of, they're two pretty pivotal moments. And
mm,
I think for me, it was very much that thing of, I genuinely, when I join a business, I genuinely care about the people that I work with. And when something goes wrong, like it hurts me just as
mm.
much. Not probably not just as much, physically,
No, but
etc.
yeah,
But
yeah,
emotionally, it's I find it incredibly difficult. And
mm,
we were an industry it was an incredible industry to be in, and really, really exciting. And the idea that, he wasn't gonna come back for a really long time, you know, we I was really proud about the way that we looked after him and his
mm,
family. And I think that for me was one of the biggest takeaways, was actually sometimes you can put everything in place. You can have a really great health and safety culture and a place where people are holding each other accountable. I'm more than happy to walk off a site if it's not safe. Um, and we'd created that kind of culture, which was really great. And even then, accidents
yeah,
can happen.
yeah,
Um, and I think for me, it was the way that I handled that accident, the way that we investigated it, the way and the aftercare that we gave him and his family, I was incredibly proud of. And
mm,
I think that kind of spurred this conversation on about, well, why are you just sitting there in one business, and why aren't you talking about it more?
yeah,
We should be shouting about what we do,
mm,
because what we do literally saves lives.
yeah,
And yeah, so in a very long roundabout way,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think, yeah, they were both really difficult, both falls from height, both really, really hard, um, both really young men,
mm,
and I think the idea, yeah, and that just kind of became this real driver for me, which is why
mm,
I then joined IOSH's council, and then kind of got to the point where it was like, well,
yeah.
yeah, let's go and give it a go in the big seat, and
Yeah.
see what happens. So,
See if we
and
can
here and
make
here
a
we
difference.
are. Yeah.
And here we are. Yeah, yeah. When you talked about that feeling in your stomach, it just reminded me, and it's obviously not nowhere near as bad, but
Mm.
as a parent, it reminds me of, when you're watching them like running and they're just about to fall over, and you kind of get that like, yeah,
Mm.
horrible like feeling in your, yeah.
Yes. Oh
Um
no, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is, I suppose being a parent is a bit like, I mean, hilariously, they did used to call me their mum. Like I was always work mum.
yeah,
Um, and I think that is, as a parent, you help shape their view of the world and their view of risk and how they manage it, but they still have to take risks and
yeah,
figure that out. And sometimes that, yeah, that kind of lurch of your
yeah,
heart leaving your body,
yeah.
yeah, is really, really powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we all take risks every day. We cross the road and
Mm.
we drive our cars and we eat stuff, and
Yeah.
and we play with knives, and, or not play, we use knives, and so on and so forth. I
Insight
won't say
into
play
your
with
world
knives.
there, Christian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I do have to play with knives sometimes with my kids, but in a
Of
very,
course.
blunt
Yeah.
knives, blunt knives.
Mm.
Um,
But
so
that's what we do all day, isn't it? We
yeah,
dynamically risk assess all
dynamically
the
risk assess.
time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I talk about that in risk assessment training. What do we do before we cross the street? We look both ways. We double check whether there's anything
And we're all
coming.
very good at it, interestingly.
Yes, we are, because the consequences of that are ouch in a big way.
Mm, yeah.
We do it all the time. And that, I think that's the bit that interests me, is an awful lot of what we do in this profession is about recognizing and managing risk, which we do naturally, but we still
Mm.
have this hugely negative view about health and safety and what we're actually about, which is bizarre and
Yeah,
yeah, really strange.
yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Yeah, no, it is, and it definitely a fight worth having to
Oh,
change that.
absolutely.
So I thought, Kelly, we would pick up on your three kind of key themes that you've identified
Mm.
for the year. And then I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the leisure sector as well, because obviously that's where you've
Sure.
been most recently active, and obviously there's some interesting things about that sector.
Mm.
What order would you like to do the three in?
So I think the first one's quite obvious. The first one is a big focus on working at height.
Yeah.
It's still, for very obvious reasons. It's still, one of the biggest causes, if not the biggest cause of significant injuries and fatalities across the world.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and I think if we can continue to if we can have very significant conversations about it, if we can share learning across the world about, where best practice is and what we can learn from each other, um, and we can really tap into the industries where most working at height is done.
Mm.
So yes, construction is obvious, events, broadcast, or there's so many where
Yeah.
working at height is prevalent, and I think if that's what we're here to do, isn't it? We're here to save lives, and we're here to try and make sure that people go home at the end of every day.
Yeah.
And if that means that we need to sit and look at a really big topic like working at height, then yeah, let's do it.
Mm.
Um, so the second one is around coaching skills. Um, and I think that's part of the way that I lead.
Yeah.
And it's part of the way that I've found to be really beneficial. Kind of when we talk about empowering people and kind of like really letting them live and breathe health and safety. I think coaching skills is a really interesting way of being able to do that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, being able to explore what that means, what that looks like, why it's very different to mentoring, and um, and adding that to kind of our toolkit as health and
Yeah.
safety professionals and practitioners.
Mhm.
And then the last one is kind of attached to this first one, I suppose, which is around professional well-being. So
Yeah.
how we as health and safety professionals look after ourselves.
Yeah.
We spend an awful lot of time looking after everybody else. Um, we're starting to see increasingly that that mental health and well-being is part of our remit. Um, and I've experienced burnout and poor mental health throughout my career, but ironically felt that I couldn't go and seek out help because I was the one that everybody came
Yeah.
to ask for help.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that is really key. We're often very alone as well. There's a lot of us that are, consultants or single, we're a team of one in a business,
Mm.
and being able to have that kind of network and that support around us, especially when things go wrong, but also just in the actually, I'm really struggling. IOSH gives us fantastic connections, and we have groups and communities and branches where we can go for great technical support or sharing knowledge. But actually, I think sometimes it's that connection bit that we sometimes miss. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's kind of my three in as quick a nutshell as I can.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's a great summary. Well, let's just delve into those in a bit more detail then, and do it in that order. Um, I think one of the things I see is there's such a big focus on preventing serious injuries and fatalities. And so you think, as somebody who obviously, I'm sort of involved in the other end typically of safety. Obviously sometimes there are, very serious injuries, but it's less
Yeah,
frequent in what I do. Um, so as a sort of outsider, um, from that world, I suppose, it frustrates me a bit. And you sit and you think, well, why aren't we getting there? Are there any common themes that you say that you know, where we're struggling with this?
do it's really interesting. I had this conversation a little while ago, a very similar conversation in Manchester. I'd sat on a panel where we talked about the consequences of falls from height. And I think, and literally the day before, the HSE had released a case study around a 61-year-old steeplejack who had fallen a terrifying height. And it turned out that he hadn't got a harness on. There
Mm.
wasn't a rescue plan. There wasn't secondary systems. And I think the HSE said something around that the business had a laissez-faire attitude towards health and safety.
Right.
And I think this is, and actually, I think that's one of the difficulties we've got is, I don't know, look at scaffolders, for example. Scaffolders are roofers. They are a completely different breed. They
Yeah.
work at height all the time. And,
Doesn't
you know,
phase them.
yeah. And then it gets to the point where it doesn't phase them and actually they become
Mm.
quite complacent. And that is not around, it's not around victim blaming in any way, shape, or form.
No.
It's around recognizing that the more we're exposed to a level of risk, the more we become used to it. Um,
Yeah.
and and I think that becomes a really interesting part of the conversation. Um, there's an awful lot we can do around training, around making sure people have got the right equipment and the right PPE, and but at the same time, it's that accountability piece and making sure that, I can't be with every single person I work with all of the
No.
time, sitting on everybody's
No.
shoulder going,
Yeah.
why are you
Yeah.
doing it like that? Do it safer, do it better.
Yeah.
Take a
Because then you're the health and
second.
safety police as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not what we're here for. I in fact I changed my job title from global health and safety manager to global health and safety coach.
Right.
Um, because actually the coach bit is really important. We deliver the training, we give the practice plays, whatever sporting or kind of yeah, whatever sporting analogies you want, but we're the ones on the side of the pitch
Yeah.
when they're playing and when they're doing that work. And you've just got to hope that we've given them the right training, we've given them the empowerment to stop and think and change things if things aren't working properly or things don't
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And
Um,
as you said earlier as well, even if you do everything you possibly could, something
yeah,
can still happen as well.
yeah, exactly. And then it's knowing, and it's that after bit, isn't it? It's okay, we've had an incident, right? What do we need to learn? How do we need to fix this? How do we do this to prevent this incident from happening again?
Mm.
Um, but I think the real difficulty, one of the big difficulties is corporate memory.
Yeah.
People move on, businesses move on, um, and you get to a point where you potentially have very few people in the business who remember that incident.
Mm.
Um, and then you feel like you're dragging up kind of the worst day the worst day of the business's life, as it were, time and time again. And it's not necessarily to scare people, it's to recognize that these things can and do happen.
Yeah.
The stats from, falls from height was nearly one family every week got a knock on the door last year saying that
Mm.
somebody wasn't
Yeah.
coming home from a fall from height.
Yeah, because
And
it's what was it,
yeah,
about 134 fatalities, but yeah, Fawcett was by far the biggest, wasn't it?
it was 50 falls from height
Yeah. Mm.
fatalities last year from the
Yeah.
HSE.
Mm.
And that's just talking in the UK where we
Yeah.
record it appropriately and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the problem obviously is exponentially larger in other countries, of course. Yeah.
Hugely. And I think that's the thing is we need to, I look at that ILO number. It's like 7,500 people. Like it just takes my breath away. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah.
And I compare it to, things like 9/11, which makes me sound really old, but I remember,
No, that's exactly
it's
what was
three and
going
a
through
half.
my head. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
it's like
Yeah.
it's over double 9/11. It's like,
Mm.
yeah, it's over double the people that were lost in 9/11 and
Mm.
how, half the world went to war over that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we just seem to shrug and accept it. And I find that really difficult. So yeah, so I think from the working at height perspective, I'm obviously talking an awful lot around it.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing hopefully a kind of not a back to basics because I don't like the phrase back to basics. It seems like
No.
it's not
I
that
th
we've
I think
forgotten
I
them.
yeah, I think I always talk about good to great. So like in my world,
Yeah,
you don't go into an organization uh, anywhere and find they're doing nothing. You
Yeah.
find that most people are doing a
Mm,
pretty good job. But the point I always make is, and it's probably relevant to this as well, is well, look, the difference between doing, good and great
mm,
is actually the outcome difference is exponential, but the amount of time and effort and investment
mm.
is not that big. So therefore,
Yeah.
why don't we try and go from good to great?
Well, why not? I mean, it's one of the, it's that old adage, isn't it? If you think safety is expensive, try an
Mm.
accident.
Yeah,
And that's not just the financial expense, it's the emotional expense and the time and just how long it takes people who are directly involved to
yeah,
kind of recover.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that so yeah, so we're looking at kind of reviewing some of the fundamentals around working at height, whilst also trying to look at some of the innovations and some of the
yeah,
really exciting things that are happening out there.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of the tech around like drones and
Mm.
stuff like that, for
Oh
example,
God,
means
yeah.
that, we can do a survey of things without having to work at
Yeah.
height. Well, that's great. Obviously, the more we can do that and actually,
Mm.
prevent that from happening at all,
Yeah.
and obviously that's going to be
Mm.
massively helpful in reducing that risk.
Definitely. And I think that's the hope is I'm not naive enough to think 1 year talking about it is enough because I don't think it's ever going to be.
No.
But if we can be in a position where, we're starting to understand the real root causes of why those fatalities are happening, I think
Yeah.
that will really enable us as a profession to actually really target and understand that, I don't know, say if 90% of the 50 fatal falls from height last year were down to a lack of training or a lack of equipment. We know that if we target those,
That
we
can be
might
addressed.
nudge
Yeah.
that dial really quickly,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
impactfully, which would be really
Mm.
exciting to be able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, that whole root, really asking
Mm,
why, and getting down
yeah.
to the real true root cause is so important. And I think sometimes we can sort of rush to a conclusion,
Yeah.
um, play the blame game sometimes far too much as well, and
Mm,
lose that opportunity to learn. Because of
yeah.
course, we ideally we want nothing bad to happen in
Mm,
the first place, but if it does, what can we actually learn from it and
yeah.
use it as something that will be beneficial in the future, albeit it's been
Mm,
horrible in the past.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I
Mm.
think that you just said something really interesting around kind of blame. Um, so I sometimes feel that I'm a bit controversial when I say I don't believe in a no blame culture, um, because sometimes people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah,
I talk about, a fair blame or a just blame culture,
mm.
which I think is really important because it ensures that people are also accountable for their own actions and the consequences of those actions as well.
Yeah,
Um, and that's not just the individual or the team. That could be, the leadership team or, the health and safety team, and I think it becomes really important that we move away from this idea that nobody is ever at fault, but actually by saying it's a just culture or it's a fair blame culture, as we talk about how we learn and how we improve rather than going, oh, there's nothing to be done. Nobody's accountable for this.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, no, I mean, look, nobody sets out to. Well, I say nobody.
Absolutely.
There's probably zero. There's some sort of 0.00001%
Yeah.
of people who are obviously not this way too, but
Mm,
the vast majority of people don't set out to hurt themselves or others.
goodness
Um,
no.
but they sometimes make a bad decision. And
Mm,
if that decision goes against, how they've been shown to do things and trained to do
yeah.
things and their
Mm,
responsibility, then obviously, you know, um, that's something that there has to be some level of accountability
mm,
for. I mean,
yeah.
how many times have you heard, well, of course that person fell over. Did you see the high heels they were wearing? Well, no, that's just ridiculous,
Oh,
unless they're,
goodness
well,
me.
obviously,
Yeah.
if they're in a factory where there's a PP policy and they're wearing high heels, then yeah, but other than
Very
that,
different.
no.
Yeah.
So there's degrees of this, isn't there?
Mm. I mean, my sister can run in high heels. She's terrifying. I definitely can't.
It's impressive.
It is impressive. But yeah, I mean, I've had it in places before where, the grating, you've got kind of grate channels and and the grating is just that perfect
Yeah.
spacing that
Yeah.
your
Catches
6 inch
the yeah.
stiletto goes straight in. Um, but yeah, I mean, we all take personal accountability, don't we? None of us just blindly follow, blindly cross the road without looking unless
Mm.
we're massively preoccupied and something else is going on.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you're right. Very few people go to work
Yeah.
and go, yeah, I'm going to hurt myself today or I'm going to hurt
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Keep it. Keep that in mind.
Mm,
So let's move on then to coaching, leadership, all that kind of fun
mm,
stuff. Had a good conversation with Al Hocking about some of the soft skills that the safety profession needs to continue to work
mm,
on. So very much aligned to that, and something I've been talking about for a long time as well.
mm.
What do you see the biggest sort of challenge here, or what does the lack of, well, not lack of, but the sort of we're not as good at this as we could be. What does that mean? What's the outcome of that, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
So I think I think one of the things is I hate the word expert. I hate the word expert anyway, but I am not
Yeah,
the expert in lifeguarding. Yeah, I work in the leisure industry, pools, swimming pools, lifeguards, whole new world for me. Um, and so I'm not the expert in that.
mm,
So for me, when I first joined my current employer, um, I spent an awful lot of time with our lifeguards, with our pool operators, with our duty managers in order to understand what the risks were from their perspective.
yeah,
Um, it goes back to that kind of that analogy I said earlier. I'm not the one on the pitch. I'm not the one
mm,
making those decisions. I can give you the framework, I can give you training, but also my view of what is a significant risk may be very, very different to what the people doing that work
yeah,
actually find. Um, so how it's getting your people involved in the risk assessment process. I haven't written a risk assessment for 6 years, 6, 7 years now, which everybody, I get an awful lot of raised eyebrows, but I don't write risk assessments because they're not
mm,
mine. They're the people I work with.
yeah,
And for me, coaching skills is that, when you get a phone call going, what do I do? This has happened. What do I do? Go, well, what do you want to do?
mm,
So it's that teach a man to fish thing, isn't it? Give him a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach him to fish, he'll be able to feed himself. And by empowering people through coaching questions, which can sometimes be really challenging, and make people feel really uncomfortable initially, I think by using those kind of coaching questions of holding a mirror up and going, well, what do you think? What would your next step be? If you were making that decision, because you should be making that decision, if you're making that decision, what would you need? What information would you need? And how would you come to that decision? Um, you empower your people an awful lot more. And
mm,
I really do strongly believe that that is the key to really embedding health and safety as a really positive health and safety cultures.
mm,
Um, in the broadcast and sports officiating business I worked in, I knew it had worked when I got a phone call saying, we've just walked off site. There was a skip fire, there's a drunk contractor, it's all a bit of a mess.
wow.
Sounded a bit like a Benny Hill
Yeah.
film,
You
that's for
sure
sure.
that wasn't the storyline of the TV show?
Probably should have been. Um, so we've walked off site. Can you help us write the email that we need to send to the client to tell them what we need in order for us to come back? It wasn't a phone call going, can we walk off site? It
Yeah.
was, can you help us write this email? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And at that point, I was like, yeah, this is working
Mm,
because they didn't ask for permission. They knew what they needed to do. They tried to approach the staff, the client staff on site. They weren't getting any joy. So they were fully empowered and knew that they were fully empowered to be able to leave.
yeah.
And and that was kind of it was a real kind of it was a real highlight
Mm.
at that moment.
Yeah.
And and I think that's the bit for me is, we should be coaching. Like we
Mm.
should be asking people what their thoughts are and how they would do things, because then we understand the thought process behind it. Um, I'm sure the amount of times you've seen incidents and stuff like that where you go, what were they thinking? Why was that the next decision that they made?
Mm. Mm.
Um, and actually, by asking those questions, we start to understand and start to unpick that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that learning of actually maybe we haven't trained people enough, or maybe people aren't
Mm.
familiar with what we would expect. Um, and and yeah, I think it's weird, isn't it? I think health and safety professionals were probably the only industry, probably the only profession in the world where we actually actively want to manage ourselves out of a business.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if health and safety is fully embedded and they know what they're doing and they understand risk assessing and they understand how to approach new processes and all of that kind of stuff, you kind of go, yeah, my job's done here,
Yeah.
which is really exciting. Haven't yet got there, but yeah, I'm sure it'd be
That's
exciting
the
when it does
goal.
happen. That is, of
Yeah.
course it is. Of
Yeah.
course it's the
Definitely.
goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of frameworks or like resources like books or podcasts or anything like that that you've kind of lent on in terms of, building up that confidence to um, have that type of coaching relationship or any,
Oh
ideas of like
goodness.
particular sort of questions, or is it just something that you've kind of actively tried to work on over time?
So I so during COVID, I went on the IOSH coaching for safety course, which kind of triggered this little fire.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'm in the process of doing a master's in executive coaching, which I
Okay,
might have
nice.
put on
Yeah.
pause for a little while for
Yes, yeah.
understandable
Bit
reasons.
busy at the moment, yeah.
Just a smidge. So yeah, I kind of I follow an awful lot of coaches on LinkedIn. There's some phenomenal coaches out there. And I mean, books, yeah, my bookcase is usually sat behind me, but I'm in another room today.
Yeah.
Um, so there are the stacks of books that I've got and I'm reading. One of my best friends, she started recovery coaching. So coaching specifically for the world of kind of addiction recovery. Um, and yeah, so I take bits and pieces from lots of different sources of inspiration.
Mm.
Um, I suppose even down to things like mental health first aid. That's coaching questions.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
open
yeah,
questions, it's non-judgmental, it's all of that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I'll probably send you a list afterwards
Yeah, so
because
you can
you've
always
asked
send
me
me a
that
list,
jo
yeah.
yeah, you've
Yeah.
sent me that you've
It's going to
asked me
be
that
nagging
joyful
you now.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't think of anything.
But the IOSH course is recommended, so we'll perhaps put a link in for that at the end.
Honestly,
Yeah.
massively recommended. Yeah, Michael and his team are absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's a really, really good course.
Yeah.
Highly
Who's who
recommended.
yeah, and we've had him on the podcast
Yeah.
before as well.
Mm.
So you
Brilliant.
can always go back and listen to that, or maybe I'll try and include the link to that episode in the show notes for people
Definitely.
to go back. How good would you say we are within the safety profession at sort of playing that coach role at the moment? Do you think there's a lot of room to improve?
I think there's always room to improve, isn't there?
Mm, yeah.
I read an awful lot of discussions on LinkedIn. Um, and there's lots and lots of conversations about which theory you follow and whether it's safety first or safety differently or
Oh,
safety
oh,
two and all of that kind of stuff. And I do sit there and go, hang on a minute, guys. Like
yeah,
there is value in all of it. And if you find something that works for you as a health and safety professional, then that's what it's about, isn't it? And for me, kind of finding that kind of coaching kind of unlocked that element of going, this actually gives me a structure and it gives me the
yeah,
framework for how I think safety should be done. I'm not saying it's the perfect way because I don't think
mm,
any of them are the perfect way.
no,
Um, I think it's absolutely around who you are as an individual and how you can and how you can get the best out of the teams that you work with.
Mm.
I take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from
Yeah.
everywhere. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think sometimes we get very, very excited about demonstrating our technical know-how. Um, and I hate to break it to everybody listening, but nobody else really cares that it's regulation for the working at height regs that says that you've got to have this, that, and the other. Like the people that we write our policies and our processes for don't care about the legislation. They want to know how they do their job safely. And I think sometimes we forget when we're writing things who the audience actually is.
Yeah.
Um,
And even the
and I
people
think,
above don't care about the rules and
no, of
regulations. They
course
just want
not.
to know, is the
Are
workforce
you doing
safe,
it?
and
Yeah,
are we covered if something goes wrong, basically?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And we need to know it. Of course we do.
Mm.
But yeah, I think the more we focus outward and the more we look at health and safety as a caring profession and as a serving profession, um, it's one of the questions Neetha asks all the time uh, to her, to anybody in recovery that is coached by her. How can I help you in your recovery today?
Mm.
And that for me is I flipped that and go, how can I make sure you go home? How can I help you make sure you go home today?
Yeah.
And actually, when you frame it like that, it becomes really impactful. And look, it seems to work for me. So yeah.
Very good. Very good. So you mentioned about, we're a profession that cares,
Mm,
but you also said one of the challenges, self-care. So are we looking after
mm.
ourselves at the same time? Um, and you've mentioned that, that's something you've struggled with. How how well are we doing at that? Is that something that we're really struggling with, or is it something that's very common, or is it sort of swept under the rug a bit?
I think the simple but annoying answer to that question is I don't think we know.
Yeah.
Um, we were talking earlier, weren't we? We still it's around a 70-30 or probably 75-25 split male female
Mm.
within the industry. We all know the stats around men and their mental health and suicide and all of that kind of stuff. Um, so I think we would be naive to think that that doesn't also reflect within the health and safety profession.
Mm.
Um, I think, it can be a very lonely career for an awful lot of people. People are solo consultants or they're a team of one. I think I've said that already.
Yeah.
And actually, where do you go for that help and support if you've had a really bad day, or have been exposed to the trauma of, a really nasty accident, um, where you've seen the injuries or you've seen the aftermath of the injuries, and
Yeah.
and fundamentally that's trauma, isn't it?
Mm.
And how do we as a profession then run an investigation, you know, interview witnesses who are probably also very upset and quite traumatized, whilst also going, crumbs, what did I do? Have I
Yeah.
missed something? Um, and that can be very, very difficult for an awful lot of people. Um, and I think we need to be much more comfortable with talking about it,
Mm.
essentially.
Mm.
I think the more we talk about it, the more we realize that we're not on our own.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine who works in HR. She turned around to me one day and she goes, "Do you know what, Kelly? I do not understand why you are always so stressed. If you miss something, it's not like it's going to kit. Oh no,
Mm.
if you miss something, you literally could, like somebody could actually die. Yes, okay, now I
Yeah.
understand. Off you go."
Yeah.
And I think for me, it was that sudden realization of, yeah, we carry a huge amount of responsibility and
Mm.
accountability. Um, And I think, yeah, why not? Why don't we talk about it? We talk about everybody else's mental health and everybody else's well-being. Why don't we talk about our own? So
Yeah.
that's why it's what
Yeah.
up there.
Mm. I sp Part of it, I wonder if it's around that we're the rock, the reliable person, the
Yep.
sounding board, the whatever, and then
Mm.
you sort of So you're kind of taking on everyone
Yeah.
else's. I was going to swear, but I won't. Problems. Um,
Yeah.
and then yeah, how do you kind of unload that?
Mm,
Uh, uh, and and also I think there's everybody sort of because of what it is that's being done, and it's about having certainty and having control and
mm,
everything. All the boxes are ticked, even though I use that as an analogy of
mm.
we're doing everything well. We
Yeah.
don't want to sort of say, well, actually, in this thing, I'm not doing
Yeah.
things so well. So you can sort of see how there's
Mm,
a lot of internal and I suppose external pressures on you
mm.
know bottling it up and sort of just getting on with it and dealing with it. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's not an easy thing.
Mm.
Um,
And sometimes when we're involved in really awful incidents, sometimes the first thing that gets put under our noses is an NDA.
yeah,
So we don't feel that we can talk about it. And that bottling up, I mean, we all know bottling stuff up is really not healthy for us. And I think the more we're comfortable with being able to talk about our mental health and our well-being, um, it's that leading loudly element, isn't it? It's, you know, I saw something the other day around how people should be, leaders should be parenting loudly. Like not, oh, I'm just sneaking off. It's no, I'm going to go and pick my children up because then that, or I'm going to a parents' evening, or I'm going to a
yeah,
nativity, or I'm going to a school play, because it gives everybody else around you permission to also be a parent. Um, I think that's the thing is if we're not taking responsibility, but I suppose we are taking responsibility for other people's mental health and well-being. We're
mm,
setting up frameworks, we're providing support, we're often mental health first aiders as well. It's where do we go? Where is that release for us? And yeah, like you said, when you're expected to be everybody else's rock, like
mm,
where do you go when you need that support as well?
yeah, yeah. So what support is there at the moment within the profession, and what are you planning to do this year to whether that's to just to talk about it more and raise the profile, or anything sort of concrete that you're planning to do in this space?
So at the minute, it's around talking about it and raising the profile. There's a webinar in a couple of weeks, which I'm really looking forward to, around increasing emotional intelligence for better decision making, which
Nice.
is
Okay.
really fab. And then that's terrible, terrible grammar. Uh, Me and one of the vice presidents, well, yeah, and two of the president, three of us out of the presidential team are sitting down in Birmingham in April, and we're doing a
Yeah.
fireside chat about our mental health and incidents that have impacted us across our careers as well. Um, because I think actually it's really important that if we're asking the rest of the profession to be comfortable in talking about their
Yeah.
struggles, that we should be
Try
leading
and
loudly.
yeah.
Um, and and yeah, and hopefully there are other things coming further down the pipeline. But yeah, can't necessarily talk about that just yet.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
that's
fine.
a
Don't
dot
worry.
dot
Yeah.
dot for now.
Yeah. All right.
Um, yeah,
All good. No problem with that. Yeah. Annoyingly, it's in half term, isn't it? It's in Easter holidays.
yeah,
The
yeah, it
the
is, isn't
event. So
it?
I'm sort of trying to figure out how to make it, but I'll try and make it along and support you from the
That'd be
audience
great.
if I can. Yeah. Let's turn quickly then to the leisure sector, because it's
Mm,
something that we haven't covered a huge amount on the podcast before, but it's obviously a really interesting sector in terms of it's quite unique in many ways, and some of the risks that you face are kind of
mm.
different, shall we say? What would you see as the kind of uh, one, two, three, or something most sort of significant risks that are kind of quite unique to that sector?
I would say water is probably one of our biggest risks, obviously.
Yeah,
So I look after seven or eight, I can never quite remember, seven or eight swimming pools, and
yeah,
you know, we run hundreds of swimming lessons every week. We teach adults to swim, all the way down to kind of 6 months old, all the way up
Yeah.
to however old. And I think, yeah, water becomes one of the biggest risks that we have.
Mm.
Managing the water as well. So we have huge fun pool plant, lots of fun chemicals.
Yeah.
Chlorine is always a fun one to be playing with all the time.
Yeah.
Um, I have an ice rink, and I would say probably 80 to 90% of my riddles come from the ice rink.
Okay.
Um, you know, you put people on a slippery surface and then
Yeah.
strap blades to their feet.
Blades to their feet. Yeah. Yeah.
People tend to fall over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, I'd say those were kind of our probably biggest two. And to be fair, I think the one of the other risks is probably one that's not necessarily considered very much, and that's probably the transient nature of the workforce.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that.
Um,
Yeah. Mm.
yeah, we have an awful lot of people who are casual staff or only work weekends. Um, you know, the leisure industry is a difficult industry. Um, it's one of the first things that disappears when people don't have any money. They tend not to
Yeah.
go swimming or ice skating or bowling, and if they do, they don't tend to go for pizza afterwards anymore. And people cut their cloth, and that is seen very immediately within the
Mm.
leisure industry.
Mm.
Um, I also look after a theatre, and that involves working at height, working with moving parts, often in the dark as well, just to be
Yeah.
really helpful. And yeah, it's a really interesting and varied industry to be in, that
Yeah.
is for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah, what you picked up on one of the sort of challenges I was interested to get your view on, which was that kind of the workforce piece, because you've got, yeah, as you say, part-time or seasonal or even
Mhm.
like brand new,
Yeah.
or people who are I've signed up to be a lifeguard, I'm now having to scrub the toilets, I'm not really sure I like this. So
Yes.
how do
Yep.
you sort of how do you kind of foster that culture of safety, with a workforce like that? Is that more difficult than, in a factory, let's say, where, people have been there for a long time and they're kind of
Yeah, I think
yeah, different type of people, yeah.
it is. And you also get, because for some bizarre reason we allow 16-year-olds to be lifeguards,
Yeah, yeah, news to the
which
workforce, yeah, yeah,
yeah, so we've got very young people. Often it's their first job. They don't really understand, or their perception of risk is often quite different.
yeah,
Um, so I think for me, that induction becomes really key. I love delivering inductions. Um, the first three questions I ask is, what do you know about health and safety? What's bad about it? What's good about it? And literally the first kind of 20 minutes, half an hour, they tell me all the horrible things about health and safety and the fact that
yeah,
it stopped them playing conkers in school and they can't ride donkeys on Blackpool Pleasure Beach anymore and all of that kind of stuff. And then we go, right, let's actually talk about it. Why does this exist? Um, and and I think one of the joyful bits for me is that little light bulb moment when they go, oh, she's not here to make my job more difficult.
yeah,
She's here to try and make sure that, we do our jobs in the best way possible.
yeah,
Um, and we go through all the usual stuff. We talk about the key risks and how they manage those. We have a little bit of fun around things like manual handling. Um, and yeah, and I think that kind of continuing engagement becomes really important.
mm,
I try and avoid sitting in an office as much as
yeah,
possible. I like to be out and about. I like to go and talk to the people that I'm working with, because I think that's really important.
yeah,
I look after 15 sites across one city,
yeah,
and yeah, like, why would I want to be sat in an office all the time
yeah, yeah,
yeah, being able to go around and talk to people enables them to talk to me about what their biggest concerns are. And sometimes it's a really quick, easy win, and sometimes it's an awful lot more complicated. Um, and yeah, I think that human touch becomes really, really important,
Mm.
especially in an industry where you do have seasonal workers, you do have people
Yeah.
that, are here for a few days a week or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm,
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. The other thing I was interested to talk about was kind of the other side of people, as in your customers. So you've got people whose kind of perceptions of risk might be
mm,
different, shall we say?
hmm.
Um, People who are, potentially even, I don't know what you necessarily have, but might even be going in and like doing boxing, so they're actually like engaging in risky activities, or if
Yeah.
they're, you know, or they're going in to lift weights, which obviously
Mm.
brings risks and things like that. So, how do you sort of balance off, that sort of factor with making sure that it's, a safe environment, but also that they can go away and do, all the activities and the fun stuff that they want to do? How do you juggle those things?
I think it's a really interesting balance, isn't it? Because everything we do has an inherent level of risk in it. And I think, for us, it's around that engagement with the public. Um, our gym instructors are trained to a certain level, which enables them to be able to go and talk to people if they see things that they're probably not doing quite right, or they're not in a kind of judgmental way, but more of a, if you do that, you are going to hurt yourself. This is potentially how you could do that better, or in a better way. Um, our staff build up really great relationships with their regular customers. They see them on the regular, which is really lovely.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and then you have the event side where you have a whole heap of people come in for an event. There's usually alcohol involved, you know, loud music, etc. Things get really interesting.
Mm.
Um, we had a local lad, called Youngblood, come in, and he was the first standing gig that I'd done with DCLT.
Mm.
We have a venue that can hold 3,500 people in a standing event,
Mm.
and Youngblood is quite punky, quite kind of pop punk. He runs mosh pits and
Right.
all of
Okay.
that. And actually, what I think the nicest bit was he knew how to manage them, and he
Yeah.
managed from the stage, which was absolutely brilliant. Um, and really, really interesting to watch we're going to encourage you to do this kind of really risky behavior over here, but actually we're going to give you warning. And if somebody goes down, you pick them up and we look after each other, was kind of the real kind of driving kind of theme
Mm.
around what he was talking about.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's a really interesting balance that you have to. It's not about nannying people or kind of mothering people,
Mm.
but at the same time, it's about making sure that people have the best time that they can whilst being as
Yeah.
safe as possible.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Good stuff. Conscious of time, so two last questions, and then we'll go into some plugs.
right.
Um, if somebody's joining us today and they're not in the health and safety profession, what would you
Mm.
say to them to kind of encourage them to get involved?
First off, what are you doing? Come on. No. Um,
Well, we've got two very good-looking people talking. I mean, what more could you want?
Absolutely. No, I think when I talk about health and safety in my career, I've traveled the world with health and safety. And I think one of the really exciting things, I'm just pausing, my husband's just walked in and the dogs have just gone mental.
That's all right.
Oh,
It's fine. I can't even hear it.
oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Um, so I think one of the things for me is I have been part of some really exciting kind of moments. I was part of the team that brought international cricket back to Pakistan, which was no mean feat.
Mm.
Um, I've been I've been literally all over the world. And I think the thing that's really exciting about health and safety is whatever industry you can think of, health and safety is also there.
Yeah.
Um, so if you want a career where you have the potential to do anything and be involved in absolutely any industry that you can think of, if you want to be a part of an industry that genuinely cares about the people that it works with, that is always learning, that is always recognizing that there are things we can do in a better way, um, and you don't have the time and effort, time or energy rather, to become a medical doctor. Come and be on the preventative side, and come and be a health and safety professional.
Perfect. And last question then. So you've convinced that person, or
Mm,
we're talking to somebody who's already involved.
yeah.
What would your advice be to a safety professional about making an impact? You know, you've made an impact. You've
Mm.
told your story at the start. What advice would you give to somebody who is inspired and wants to make their own impact?
I think that there's an awful lot that we can do as there's only so much we can do as individuals. I think joining something like IOSH has really allowed me to see the fact that, we can have 50,000 people dotted around 130 odd different countries across the world who all say we want a safe and healthy world of work for everybody. We want everybody to go home at the end of every day of work, no matter who they are, no matter what they do, no matter where they are in the world. Um, like that as an impact and a mission becomes really, really impressive. Um, IOSH is really interesting as an institution. We've got a very, very clear value, and I think the way that the industry is changing, the way that the risk, we're seeing new and different and more interesting risks, and we're trying to stay ahead of that in order to be able
Yeah.
to make it safe, becomes really interesting. And IOSH has got, you know, not quite hundreds, but it feels like we've got hundreds of kind of communities and branches and sector groups and places where you can learn best practice, not just in the UK, but across the world. Like, why would you not want to be part of an institution that has such a clear value at the absolute heart of it?
Perfect. And thank you so much for joining today. Been really, really, really great.
Thank you for having me.
No, pleasure. I've got to give you the floor for any plugs. So tell us what's coming up. You know, you've mentioned some webinars and some events, and give us a few plugs of things where people can get involved and we'll get some value.
Yeah, so I'm literally getting my calendar out so I can start to look at it. So we have a webinar celebrating the Day of Social Justice on the 19th of February. We have lots of stuff. I have a Working at Height face-to-face event with the East Anglian IOSH branch on the 4th of March, which
Nice.
is going to be really exciting. And then, flicking into kind of April, we obviously have the health and safety event at the NEC,
Yep.
which I'm very much looking forward to. We'll also be hopefully doing another Celebrating Volunteers event there. And then, yeah, we start to venture off into kind of May, June, and July,
Yeah.
where I think I'm going to Saudi for a
Jet
conference
setting around the
and
world. Yeah.
jet setting around the world. Absolutely. So yeah, it's going to be really, really exciting this year, and hopefully I can continue to make a bit of an impact and nudge that dial a bit closer to a safe and healthy world of work.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, wish you all the very best with it, Kelly. And yeah, thank you so much for joining.
That's all right. Thank you for having me. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks. And thanks for joining Kelly and I today. And we'll see you on next week's episode. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.